So this video was making rounds in the past month or so, and it's a video made by a young dark-skinned woman expressing how she feels like there's a skin tone gap in the modeling industry, especially amongst dark-skinned black women. And I'll show you the video and then I will go on to provide my commentary.
How black dark-skinned supermodels are more on the extremely dark-skinned side, right? But your day-to-day girl isn't as dark as them. You know, your day-to-day black girl isn't as dark as them. Can we talk about how there's kind of a gap missing? So it's either we have extremely dark black girls, dark-skinned black girls, or nothing. There's definitely something that needs to be filled in there. I feel like the perfect example is me. I'm dark skinned, but I'm not as dark as the Sudanese girls. But I'm very near there, but I'm not as. The lack of, like, there's such a gap between, like, light skinned models. Then we got, like, dark skinned models. But, like, I just feel like there's nothing really in between, regardless of it being on the dark skin or the brownie side. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, there's really nothing in between. I don't know. Can we talk about it?
So in regards to there being a gap in skin tone amongst dark-skinned models, I can see where she was trying to go with this talking point to an extent. She mentioned in a few of her videos that she is an aspiring model, and I can see how in her case it would be motivating and inspiring to see women who look more similar to her in skin tone and facial features. Because when you see yourself in a place that you want to be a part of, it makes you feel like your aspirations are within your reach. But we also have to acknowledge that the modeling industry isn't an industry that champions diversity, even though there have been a few efforts that have been made to make the industry more inclusive. At its core, the industry has always been exclusive. So by default, there are always going to be some gaps that could be filled to be more representative of people from different groups. One of the statements that she made that I disagree with in particular is that your day-to-day black girl is not that dark or something of the like, implying that dark-skinned women with a more darker hue, similar to the South Sudanese women that she mentioned, isn't the norm, which couldn't be further from the truth. I saw in the comment section that she lives in London and she's from the UK, and many of the dark-skinned women that she sees aren't as dark-skinned as the group of women that she mentioned that we see in the media. And just for the context, for those who are outside of London or just not in the UK in general, some of the more larger African communities tend to be of West African descent, specifically Nigerian and Ghanaian. And while the East African communities are a lot more smaller, which means that average person is probably a bit more familiar with what a West African black person looks like rather than an East African black person looks like. And I use West African and East African very loosely because within those groups, there's just so much diversity in terms of phenotypes. But for the sake of this particular topic, let's just be a bit more general. So nonetheless, we have to be careful when making generalized statements like she made, because location is an important factor in who you are likely to be exposed to. Dark-skinned women who are on the further end of the dark-skin spectrum are very much the norm. It can come off as pretty ignorant to state that just because you may not see a specific demographic within your environment, that they aren't your day-to-day black girl, or what a day-to-day black girl looks like. If you go to other parts of the world, like in Australia, there are quite a few East African communities there, including a pretty large South Sudanese community. So people from that side of the world may be more familiar with those particular groups of people, specifically black people. And this is why exposure to different people is so important. Social media has made that possible for us because we can see someone else's norm that is different to our norm. And the more exposed you are to the outside world, the less prone you'll be to make ignorant comments. And look, Everyone has made ignorant comments before, but when we have, or when you have the opportunity to be corrected, just take it. And you all know I bang on about creating that United Nations friendship group and network, or should I say networks, where you have friends and acquaintances from all over the world, and this includes friendships with Black women from all over the world. As Black women, we all share very similar experiences, especially in the Western society, which is great when finding common ground. But we also have our own unique cultures and customs that we practice and our ancestors have practiced that are linked to our ethnic and cultural backgrounds that we can all learn from. It's not necessary for us to all be the same and alike. We should be able to embrace our differences too, and we can learn from each other. And this also helps in terms of building allyships amongst each other. Because the last thing we want is for these conversations to become diaspora wars between West African women and East African women. And these wars aren't going to help us in the slightest. Rather, they will create resentment, anger, and even more jealousy towards each other. So the girl in the video received quite a bit of backlash. And I think one of the reasons in this case that she received backlash is because she singled out a particular group of women, and people are obviously going to take it as a personal attack, and rightfully so. So instead of throwing the South Sudanese girls under the bus, she could have said that she wants to see more dark-skinned women who are in the mid-range spectrum, and that would have been a better approach because people would have been more inclined to listen to her points. And I noticed that some of the people who were agreeing with her points kind of deviated from the topic and went on to talk about how the dark skin models that we see always have short, natural hair and never long hair. And that's problematic. And in a sense, I can see what they're saying because it touches on the issue that a lot of Black women face in the modeling industry, which is many hairstylists just don't know how to style type for hair. So they would rather the models keep their hair short, which is a problem because it's basically laziness and neglect from the hairstylists. If you as an agency or as a brand hire models who have a different hair type, shouldn't the responsibility be on you to accommodate the model's needs? I'm not in the modeling industry, so I don't know the ins and outs. But if you are in the industry, let us know how these type of situations are handled because I'm pretty intrigued. Wanting to see more dark-skinned women in longer hair isn't an issue in itself. I understand that within the Western society, shorter hair on women is deemed as a more masculine way of presenting. And some Black women think that the modeling industry is keeping the women's hair short to masculinize, in particular, dark-skinned women, which may be true in some cases, but why is it an issue when dark-skinned women have short natural hair? Had the dark-skinned women worn straight Cambodian silky wigs, I doubt that these complaints would even exist. Short type for hair is a norm for many women in different parts of Africa and also in the diaspora, just like having longer hair is the norm for other African women and women in the diaspora as well. Another point that they brought up that I saw in the comment section was that the dark-skinned South Sudanese women are being fetishized for their facial features by the modeling industry, implying that the women are being taken advantage of. But my thing is, aren't you also going to be fetishized by the same modeling industry? Since you are asking to be represented in the same industry as the rest of the girls, do you know that you will also be subjected to that same fetishization that you claim these women are experiencing? Just some food for thought. One thing that I have noticed about the recent mainstream exposure that dark-skinned women have been getting in general is that there's been a lot of praise from Black women in particular, which is obvious for it to happen, but there are a lot of Black women who are quite uncomfortable with seeing the more darker skinned toned Black women or the dark skinned women who are on the darker end of the spectrum. And I think that most of it chalks up to how lots of black women have been brought up in societies that exhibit varying levels of colorism. They grew up around women and men who bleached, most likely. Their most famous celebrities have bleached to oblivion. The women who are deemed the most beautiful in their country most likely tend to be lighter skinned and or have bleached too. Their elders told them not to go out in the sun so they don't get darker or they won't get a husband. They may have witnessed a dark-skinned child in the family being compared to a lighter-skinned child, and the lighter-skinned child was favored. In some African countries, the bleaching rates are astronomically high to the point that they've actually gained a reputation for it, which is pretty sad, to be honest. And now, add the subliminal messages from the mainstream media about how darker skin is lesser than. All these things added up can create a level of cognitive dissonance amongst some black women, especially dark-skinned black women. They are finally seeing women who are as dark as them being praised for their beauty in the mainstream media. But deep down inside, they still hold that belief that they picked up growing up about dark-skinned women, or just dark skin in general, being ugly and less than. And they just can't let that go. So when they see women who are even darker than them, that triggers them even more. Because in their mind, these dark-skinned women would be considered as ugly in the society that they're familiar with. And many won't admit it, but they do still hold the belief that these dark-skinned women aren't pretty enough because of their dark skin. I also saw other comments stating that these dark skin models in the spotlight are mostly East African, and these modeling agencies don't pick West and Central African and just other women from other Afro-descended groups. And whilst I can definitely see that a lot of the limelight currently is on East African models at the moment. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are in large numbers compared to other skin tones or compared to just women from other parts of the continent. The other skin-toned women are just not in the limelight as much as the dark skin-toned women are currently. Right? And I say currently, it's a very important word because we're talking about now, and the modeling industry, the way that it is, it's very fast paced. So things can change in a blink of an eye. But people also tend to ignore the fact that there are actually many models, black models from West Africa, especially like in places like Senegal, Gambia, Mali. A lot of models, especially the dark skin models that you've probably seen, probably come from there. So just because they are not as popular, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. If you feel like they're not as popular and you feel like they are the ones who represent you the most, you can take that as a cue to actually support these women and support models who represent you the most. So here are a few women who you can support. I don't want to butcher their surnames, so I'm just going to say their first names. So we have Bola, we have Ruth, Mayowa, and we have Eniola. These are all examples of darker skinned women who I guess are not on the darker end of the spectrum, but you can still support. Everyone deserves to be represented, but is that really going to translate into the reality? Most likely not, which leads me to say what I've said before, which is we need to control our own image and get to the positions where we can create the possibility to represent as many groups of black women as possible. If you don't feel represented by East African dark-skinned women that you see in the media, that is completely fine. In these situations, you should focus on the people who do look like you, because that is a way of putting yourself on a pedestal, and also support them too. And with all this being said, in all honesty, a lot of these conversations really need to be directed towards those in the positions of power who are actually picking these models, a lot of them are rich white men. They make the decisions, but are most people going to actually have these conversations with these men? Most likely not. So that's just my commentary on the topic, and I thought that it would be quite interesting to have this conversation. So what do you all think about the day-to-day black girl video? Let me know in the comment sections, and I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say.